Welcome everyone to another wonderful ACO on this gorgeous Saturday morning. The ACO is sponsored by Maryland 8th State Arts Council and by viewers like you guys. So thank you for donations and joining us this morning. If you really want to help out the ACO, please make sure you tell a friend and have them join us as well. I am pleased to introduce first Melissa Ichiuji, who's going to be introducing our artist this morning, David Page. Melissa did a talk for us back in April, so I highly encourage you to go check that out. It was a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and she is an incredible artist and sculptor as well. So without further ado, here's Melissa.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I'd like to go ahead and just remind everybody where we are again. I know you did a brief introduction, but I'd like to go ahead and just reiterate. So Art Clinic Online is produced by Jordan Bruns, who just spoke, and Mariana Kastrinakis. The goal of ACO is to promote artists in and around the DMV area through Zoom discussions that are later archived on YouTube. These discussions are free to the public and are supported in part, again, by Maryland State Arts Council, as Jordan said. So I'm very excited to be hosting today. Again, thank you for having me back. I'm thrilled to have amazing, provocative artist David Page joining us today to talk about his work. David was born in South Africa and currently resides in Baltimore, Maryland. He's a globally recognized artist who's had his pieces featured in a Hannibal movie and a Marilyn Manson music video. He's received numerous prestigious awards, including the Maryland State Arts Council's Individual Artist Award and the Trawick Prize. He was also a semifinalist this year for the Janet and Walter Sondheim Art Prize. So David serves as the sculptor in residence at American University and the Corcoran School of Art and Design at Georgetown University in DC. Inspired by Hojojutsu, a traditional Japanese martial art that involves restraining individuals with ropes, he's best known for his installations that simulate the interplay between prisoner and guard. Many of his subversive performances enlist volunteers that, and they're tinged with bondage and encasement references. I hope David doesn't mind me saying that. Page's installations fearlessly challenge conventional notions of security and the paradoxical link between perceived threats and actual risks. Through his performative experiments, he examines imbalances between sensation and fact, control and agency, and the aesthetics of punishment. Today, we have the privilege of delving deeper into David's extraordinary art practice. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Welcome, David. It's so great to have you with us.
Thank you. So I've already been introduced, so I don't have to do that for myself. But just so the landscape you're looking at right now would be, I did pull this off the web, but this is exactly what I would see looking out of the front door of my childhood home. And so this would be looking west at the Constantiaberg Mountains in Cape Town. And so it was a kind of a bucolic upbringing, except that the bucolic setting was something of a mirage. And that is that during this time, this was say from the 60s through the early 60s to the mid 80s. This was during the sort of the heyday of apartheid. And you had this kind of centralized authority, and whereby everything was there was always this sort of this threat of violence and of punishment, and there were all these sort of prohibitions, and so we would see these signs everywhere. Probably, I mean, this was like probably at an electrical substation or something like that. So, although I was very curious as a kid, I suppose it was better that I didn't climb the fence. But it says danger, gevaar, and Ngozi, which is danger in English, Afrikaans, and Xhosa. But anyway, so that this sort of prohibitive society sort of fostered this sense of curiosity about the forbidden, and also fostered a real sort of opposition to authority, but in some way you couldn't take it head on because it would squash you, and so you had to think of yourself as something of a trickster. So in that, and I remember as a kid these tales from the American South called Uncle Remus tales. They were these folk tales, and this is the tale of Brer Rabbit and how he gets into this altercation with this or this trap, which is the sticky decoy, right? The tar baby, which is really interesting. So this is the fox and the bear trying to capture him because he doesn't know his place, his apathy, and so, but the interesting is that the idea of the sticky decoy goes back to Yoruba folk tales. So it's a very interesting kind of tale and connection. But anyway, I like the idea of the trickster, and then he convinces the bear and the fox to let him go, that it'd be a greater punishment to let him go, and off he trots. And so with that, I was really, later on, of course, I came to really admire Harry Houdini, who was another Brer Rabbit, just in human costume. And I remember seeing one of the things when I was probably like a picture of Harry Houdini when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I'd never seen a straitjacket before, and the immediate thought was, what is he wearing, and where can I get one? You know. And so anyway, so there's Harry Houdini, my hero. Also, part of this upbringing, the adults in my life and everybody else's were very disappointing because they didn't really stand up to the authority, to these sadistic headmasters and everything like that, in the way that I thought they ought to. And so I developed a kind of an affinity for tools and objects because they did what they were supposed to do and they didn't let you down. And this is a collection of objects. I think I first showed this at the Arlington Art Center. And so what they all share is they have a kind of purpose. Many of them are simple machines or combinations of simple machines. And they were all sort of they were all collected by means of sort of non-traditional transactions. Like I either bartered for them, or somebody threw them over my fence, or I stole them. And some of them were retrieved from buildings that had burnt. Anyway, so this was my collection of objects. And then and at the time I had this real dread about the fact that we might be living in a post-object society and objects were losing their importance. So I thought about this, and I came up with a kind of a painting which presented itself as an object, right? Which did not, so that it presented itself in some ways as a painting. It was rectangular. It hung on the wall, albeit by means of this over-engineered hardware. But then quilting the surface made one aware of its object nature. And so this is like the painting that wants to be an object. And then I followed that with a bunch of objects that want to be paintings. And so this is a spoon. I have this huge affinity for spoons. This is one of those stamped enamel spoons normally made in Mexico. They're inexpensive. I really love them. And so I thought if I encased it in this with this vinyl scrim, then it could become an artifact and become more of an artifact and less of an object, and it would sort of live in the realm of image. And so I did this with a large stainless steel spoon, a juice reamer. There's a long story about that, but not for now. A fid, which is really just a sharpened stick that seafarers would use to splice ropes. A shoemaker's awl. And this is a tribute to Saint Crispian, the patron saint of shoemakers, and he was ironically martyred with his own shoemaking awls, which is probably not a great way to go. So and then this is Andy's reluctant gift. So one of my students was in a federal building somewhere, and he stole a doorstop for me. And this isn't the doorstop he stole, which is a prized possession, but this is a replica of that in a different color, right? So there you go. An axe handle. So I carved this axe handle. Also another great story about an axe handle in a bar fight, as told to me by an older cousin. And then this is an actual gun, which was in amongst like a box of rusty things that my wife got at an auction. Why one goes to an auction to buy rusty things, I'm not sure, but I kind of get I feel that a little bit. But anyway, and in amongst this was what she thought was a toy gun, but it was an actual frame of a revolver without the cylinder and without the scales. And so this is called reliquary, and it's part of my, and I think it's a very potent object. And so this is part of my one of this collection. These were all called The Object is Dead. So they were part of the series The Object is Dead. And this is from about 2014. So I'm really starting at about that point. And then these two hooks, you will see later on, I have this huge affinity for hooks. So on the one hand, the hook is revealed, and the other is hidden, and it has a sort of this drawn outline of all of these quilted stitch patterns that go around it, that encase it. So much for that. At the same time, I was working on this performance with, I had this sort of this creative partner, Jessica Tarr, and the two of us were sort of playing around with these ideas, dealing with captor and captive. And in this case, you would have the captor sitting on the chair, and the captive would be bound in the suit, in the sort of restraint suit, which would include a straitjacket, but it would be a sort of a total enclosure. And it would be closed, or be locked closed by means of a cable, which would also be swaged around the captor's waist. And so there would be this tether between them. And then by mutual agreement, they could change positions. So it's also about this idea like of lateral power relationships. And so, but every time they change positions, you would have to cut the cable and you'd have to re-swage it. So when everyone changed positions, obviously you get closer and closer. And so this already intimate relationship. And so I've always thought that about being punished or punishing someone, the relationship is really an intimate relationship, and it's somewhat unseemly. And so anyway, so that this would go on. And then at some point in the whole discussion, I sort of took the liberty of changing it to a sort of transportation exercise. And so I thought that the one person could tow the other. And so anyway, so we came up with a route which would start at the easternmost edge of the National Mall. So right at the, so right opposite the east wing of the National Gallery. And then we would walk all the way to the Corcoran, where it would be included in a show and the reception. So I planned to arrive at the beginning of the reception. And so Jessica is in the suit, and I'm pulling her, and we are connected by this by this cable tether. And I have this well, I should go through, and so here I am crossing the street on green, of course, not to attract too much attention. And you can see that I have this quiver with these tools in. So I have a cable cutter in there, and I have a cable swager, so I can reattach cables if I need to. And the idea was, once we got to the reception, we would change positions, and then I would be the captive for the duration of the reception. And so here I am, and so I pass by, and so it's quite nice, so that you can measure your progress by all of these auspicious buildings, right? So I pass by. This is the Hirshhorn, and look at that. I love doing that. Okay, and so then so this is the Hirshhorn, the Natural History Museum. I'm either grimacing or smiling. It was really cold, and I was in this kind of schoolboy outfit to differentiate myself from everybody else, or just shorts and a shirt, which was unusual. It was probably a few degrees below freezing at the time. I think it was early April in DC. And of course, it looks really, really bleak out there, which I think added to it. And so at this point, so we went to so just past the Washington Memorial, and then we turned north up 17th Street. So we headed towards the White House. And so this was the idea, was to do something unusual in one of the most over-policed areas of DC. And so you have probably 4, 5, 6 different police agencies that all fight for jurisdiction in this particular space. And I wanted to see what might happen. So it was just looking at because we would always have these interactions with like the Secret Service, if you're carrying artwork and everything like that. So I really wanted to tweak their noses in a sort of a friendly way and see what happened. And this is where it all sort of came to a head. And so this officer over there stopped me, asked me what I was doing. I explained to him I was doing performance art. He didn't care. And then he wanted to see my identification, which he held on to. So I said, could I have it back? And he said, no. And I said, look, all I need to do, and I honestly just needed to get to the adjacent door, and I would have made it. But I enjoyed the idea of being stopped. So I asked him if I was being detained, and he said, yes. I asked then his sergeant why, who said he didn't have to tell me. And I said, yes, in fact, he did, if he would like to be a sergeant the day after tomorrow. And so then they said, well, for kidnapping. And so we went back and forth a few times about that. And so here I am. And then then the people who were following me got a little rowdy at some point. The police told them to shut up, and they told the police to shut up. And so it started to get a bit contentious. You can see by the lamppost that a cop has his hand in his gun. And at that point, I thought that really I needed to do something about that. You know, that things might start to spiral out of hand. So I thought it was time to de-escalate. So I said, I said, I will very slowly pull these cutters out of my quiver. I'll cut the cable. We can then talk to the person inside. And if they're not under duress, then you have no reason to detain us any longer. And they said, no, I may not, because it might be a weapon. And at some point, I diverted their attention and pulled it out anyway. And that's where it becomes about a sort of a white privilege. You have a middle-aged white guy who's been cocky with the police. They don't know what to do because I have this accent. And so it goes on, you know. And so anyway, so I quickly cut the cable before they could stop me. We spoke to Jessica, who was cold, who was bewildered, but nevertheless agreed that she was not under duress. And so I freed her as much as I was going to, carried her across the threshold into the Corcoran, into the gallery, where we changed position and clothing. And then she was the minder and I was the prisoner. And that was that. So in some way, I was really ungrateful, because those cops with whom I was being kind of cheeky really completed my performance for me, and they were really important. So anyway, so moving on, soon after that, I was included in the show where it was another award show. There were, and I was a semi-finalist. This is a sometimes thing where I can't seem to break out of the semi-finalist cage, but nevertheless, it's fine being that. And so the show had a lot of participants. And so I thought I would use the architecture that nobody else wanted. And so I padded pieces of the architecture. So it's about sort of risk and risk abatement and everything like that. So that clumsy gallery goers would not hurt themselves with the architecture. So I padded a corner, and then there was this ramp which nobody else wanted, and so I created these kind of anthropomorphic, because they have this kind of fleshy color to them, these paddings for anything that protruded. So there you have, you know, some of the installation as it is. There you have one of the railings, and I just liked solving these problems about how do you cover this. So it's a kind of an architectural accommodation. And so I was really interested in that. And then I was able to move beyond the gallery space. And so this is actually at MICA and at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And so I was able to move out beyond there and take care of some of the outdoor architecture, the outdoor features as well. This became something that I continued a few years later at the American University Art Museum at the Katzen. And so I once more went about padding the front desk, some headspace for tall people, and then the stairways. That's still there. So that became part of the permanent collection. And people really think of it as some sort of architectural accommodation and don't realize that it's just a snarky little pad, that's all. And then I was able to get also once more beyond the bounds that were allowed for that exhibition. I was allowed to move into the larger gallery space. And then I'm just going through these images because I've got a lot of images going through as fairly quickly. Of course, long before that, I was really distressed by these images of the first intake of prisoners to Guantanamo Bay, and I just felt like, and everybody was angry and this and that, and but I just felt like one, you know, I was a lot more used to the idea of attacks on the home front than most others. And I also felt like no matter what these people were accused of, and they were only ever accused of, and sometimes just because of their name or something like that, that there was no reason to treat our fellow humans in this fashion. And I really believe that. And so anyway, at some point, I was sort of pondering these images that I had, and I came up with this drawing whereby you would have four people sort of seated or bound in these cross-legged positions in these enclosures, and you would provide them with air because that's the sensible thing to do, and that's all. And then anybody would be able to step into the semicircle, and they could either accuse these people of something or confess something to them. And so that would depend on whether you decided you wanted to be the accuser or the accused. And so anyway, so this first The first time I did this was at the dye factory. That's in Northeast Philadelphia. And so here we have them, and they're being supplied air by means of an industrial blower, like a really big one, big noisy one. And I thought that worked fairly well. And then I changed the piece, and I was looking for another venue, and this is at the Creative Alliance in Baltimore. And and somehow there was some comment from the curator during a studio visit, and it struck me that I was going about it the wrong way with the blower. It had sound presence, but it didn't have anything else. And so I came up with these bellows, which would then make the viewer complicit. Even though they were providing comfort, it would make them complicit in the captivity. And I like that idea, because I think a lot of times things are done in our name. And I was thinking particularly about over-incarceration in America and everything like that. And I was thinking like whether we like it or not, right? Whether we think of ourselves as humanitarians, we are complicit in this. So anyway, so here we have it with suiting people up. And then there's a family busy providing air to them. And it became a really delicate situation where people would tire from providing air, but they wouldn't stop until they could con somebody else into taking their place. And so I was really kind of interested in that dynamic. And then in the same space, so I had these two large pieces, and I was thinking about stacking one group of people above another. I was thinking about Pelican Bay and the kinds of incarceration and the fact that we incarcerate a quarter of the world's incarcerated population. We talk about, we lecture everybody else about human rights, but isn't a human right not being put in a cage and left to rot? And so I thought about this, and so the first thing I needed was a crane in order to hoist people up onto the second rung, and to do so safely. So in some ways, creating my own dangerous situation and trying to create a safe solution for it. Anyway, so these are the enclosures that I made for the piece up against the wall. So I had 6 people, and once more, they would be provided air by means of these ducts and a set of bellows that were on these kind of industrial legs that I made. You can see the hoist, a piece of the hoist off to the side there. These are the bellows. That's the hoist. So the hoist is really, I took an engine hoist, and then those tiny little ones you get in the hardware or whatever, and then changed it in order to hoist people. You can see the harness that you would use over there. And so these are the people being hoisted up. And there were these little metal perches that I'd made. And one of the reasons why I chose the space was because they had a wall that had a structure that could actually support these perches, or otherwise you would have a really dangerous situation. And so anyway, so those are the people up against the wall. They were also blindfolded, strapped to the wall. And then there you have the piece in use with people providing air. And so that whole piece is called Security Theater, which is this term coined in 2005 by Sam Wag, and it's about this idea of how we come up with these mechanisms to make people think that their security is being looked after, whereas it's really all about symbolism, right? So it's all about people thinking that they're safe, and it really doesn't make them any safer, but it makes them feel safer. And so this is an important thing. I had a chance to do something similar in Sofia, Bulgaria. I had travel being the problem and moving the stuff. And so this was the idea that I had. So I had this notion that we could, the one person could suspend the other, because they didn't have the wall that could support putting people up against it. And so I sent them this as a file, and they had all the plywood CNC routed, and I showed up with the soft parts that were part of my checked baggage. My wife and I, we just made the limit with the checked baggage, all of the ducts, the soft parts, the hardware, and every such thing, and we put it together. There's the rehearsal, and here's us putting these. So they were 2 theater students from the local university who had volunteered to be part of this. And it was strange for me, because most of the times beforehand, the volunteers were people that I knew, and they sort of knew what they were getting into. So these were people who couldn't quite, but were very, very sporting about it anyway. So we put them in, and then provided air for them for about an hour. And the whole idea was to get going quickly so that the patrons would stay. And so there you have a vision. This is a Structura gallery in Sofia. It was a former East Bloc television studio, so it has this wonderful clear ceiling to it. It was a wonderful space, so we can thank former communists for that. And here I am talking to the two participants afterwards. They had a wonderful experience. And so there you go. I chose not to blindfold them because I thought that would be too frightening. When I told them about the fact that I would normally blindfold people, they looked at me wistfully and said that they wished that I'd blindfolded them. So there you go. Don't underestimate your potential subjects. At this time, I started to get this criticism or hear this criticism that I was just this puppet master, this kind of sadistic puppet master at that. And so I thought, you know, I wasn't going to argue that in sort of open, or I would, rather than argue it, I would rather prove people wrong. So, and I'd always enjoyed being in my own work, and it just that it becomes so complicated. And I was so worried about people's safety. So I decided I would simplify it again. And so I made this, this construction for myself. There you see it. And it would sit on top of the blower that would provide it air. But also it would have the system of cables that would lock everything together, and I would be the subject. And also, so the cables held everything in place. And then it would be this device that would go through all the eyes of the cable. It would have this ball on the one end, a shaft on the other, and these three padlocks. So you'd have to unlock every padlock in order to be able to free the subject, which is me. And so then I sent keys to 3 people that had formerly been in some of my pieces, sent them in the mail, and told them to please arrive at, well, one, to confirm that they're coming, and to arrive at the reception for the show. This was at Maryland Art Place. And so there I am, encased in the piece. And then at some point, there's only one lock left, and so it was up to these people to decide when to free me. They could wait till the end of the reception, or maybe not at all. It was completely up to them, and I'd be in this piece. And so I think I spent like a total, like maybe 2.5 hours in it, something like that. It was very cold. Obviously I need to damp the amount of air that runs through the machine. So it was sort of over ventilated, and it was very noisy in there. And you had this anyway, and so you had this sensation of being in this thing, and everybody else, you know, having 2.5 hours pass of, you know, conviviality, and there I am. So anyway, so there was that. That piece was called Don't Need No Stinking Hero, or something like that. So then, and this is a piece that I've been working on for some time, and it's a sort of a complex hourglass, where you have a bag of sand and a bag of human, and then there's a linkage mechanism that you can see before the main pivot, and that allows for a greater amount of leverage. So it's a compound lever on the side of the counterweight, the bag of sand. The moment there's tension on the bag, there's the scissor mechanism which clamps the bag shut. So you can't retrieve the occupant from the bag until such time as enough sand is passed through the bag. What I did not realize was that this is totally dependent on the humidity within the building, because if the sand is, if it's cooler and it's less humid, then the sand will flow better. If not, you're in there for longer, and you don't have much control over that. So that's the that's the non-controllable thing. There's a bag with somebody in it. This is a drawing of the scissor mechanism that would clamp the bag shut. And there we have this, just a couple of pictures of the piece, not in action, so you get some idea of how it turned out. And then and then also, so one of the problems with this was this notion of agency, whereby there was this big rigmarole of tying me up, putting me in the bag, and I didn't really want that. That became the major part of the performance, and I was trying to short circuit that. So I came up with this, with once more another crane, right? And that could pick me up and just drop me right into the bag, or retrieve me, and it was mobile. And so that was my solution to it. And so there I am being hoisted, so I'm ready for action, and that's quite comfortable. And then so there I was in the bag, and this is my assistant adding sand to the bag, and so and I think this was at the end of it. This was like right at the end of it. But anyways, these are somewhat out of sequence, but this is my assistant attending to me at various phases during the performance. This was also at the Corcoran. I love that space. And so this is in their atrium looking down from the mezzanine. Thanks, photographer. Great work. So there we go. So this piece was called Compound Balance. I still love it. Can't wait to do it again sometime. I remember being at one time and it was hot, and I was at the Hamiltonian. It was really, really hot. It was in summer. I was sweating. I was uncomfortable. Everything creaked if I tried to move, and I was hating myself because I knew that if I was offered to do it a second time, I would do it again. So there you are. This is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. I just want to see how we're doing for time. I think we're doing fine. And so this was the site of, in 1911, of the terrible industrial accident or incident, where 127 or 120 something, mainly immigrant sweatshop workers, were caught in a fire on the upper floors with the shirtwaist factory, and they were unable to use the fire escapes because they were all locked to make sure that people didn't take unauthorized breaks or steal something. And so they either burnt to death or jumped to their death trying to get out of the fire. Of course, rightfully, there was a huge outcry about this. And this was the genesis for some really important labor laws regarding safety in the United States. Of course, this didn't solve a whole lot because industrialists go to where they can, and so so in 2014, the Rana Plaza collapsed in Bangladesh, and killing more than 1,000 people, injuring 5,000 or something. And so clearly nothing had changed. We'd simply found a different place to inflict our brutality on people. And so, and I mean that as consumers, that we are obviously complicit as consumers because we demand the stuff that is produced at the prices. And so anyway, so I thought about this, and at the time I have a vast collection of sewing machines. So this is a little Singer ultralight machine, and then this is another Singer. So this is one of my walking foot machines. So I draw these loving portraits of them, which I'm about to start again. And then I also took some of the machines I had as parts machines, and I started doing sort of abstracting them a little bit, and then making these covers for them, much like I do. And then created this piece called, this installation called Ornamental Cookery, which I cribbed directly from one of Roland Barthes' essays for Le Monde, and in which he talks about the brutality the sort of the necessary brutality of everyday life, and how we either hide from it or we hide it from ourselves. And so it was a mixture of spoons and sewing machines. And so I had all of these handcraft spoons. So I created this monument in the center, and then surrounded it with these sewing machines as if it was like a lager, like a wagon fortification or something like that. But so these were a number of sewing machines that I used. So I used, you can see in the foreground over there, this is really heavy. It's a 150-pound 7-class Singer harness machine. And then these other small ones are actually like 40 or 50-pound industrial machines. But they all look just like the Singer that everyone's loving grandma had, you know, and I like that sort of consistency of form, even though the size becomes more and more brutal. So this is a Singer 31 class. So this is a standard Singer industrial machine. So it's a good size. It's a hefty piece of metal. Would make a great boat anchor. And so anyway, and then these are the ones that are covered, and so they become sort of quaint looking, and we're hiding from their brutal industrial, and if you think about it, the textile industry was at the forefront of the industrial revolution, the mechanical revolution, and the mechanization of the textile industry, no matter how much time it saved, was the thing that centralized labor and took people off their land and turned them into a landless proletariat. So no matter how, and I love sewing machines, and so no matter how sort of wonderful they are, they're how charismatic they are. That's the word I was looking for. They still represent a certain kind of industrial brutality. So here we go, hiding from that again. And then so that was ornamental cookery, but I wasn't done with that yet. And so I received this from a number of friends. They, I would open my email and there'd be this image. Look at this, David. And of course I thought, wow. And so this is either a clue, a tack, or a head of a sail, and with a homemade or with a purpose-made grommet out of probably bronze or most likely bronze. And then it has this wonderful sort of stitching around to try and dissipate the strain on the head of the sail. And so I was captivated by this, and so I made my own version using a piece of 3-inch plumbing pipe, and you anneal it, and then with a hammer you can sort of fold it over, and it's a very satisfying thing to do. So I made this eye. And I was also doing these other harnesses using a combination of hand and machine stitching, copper rivets. And I was thinking about hoisting people. Of course, what else am I going to do? And so I was thinking about having sewing machines counterbalance suspended people. More people and machines. And so here's one of my big machines as well. One of these big 150-pound machines with the sling made for it. And so I made a number of these. This is a standard industrial machine, the 31 class. And then this is one of these smaller home machines. And I was thinking of the difference sort of between domestic and industrial labor. It's all still labor, and it's all either unpaid or poorly paid. And so I was thinking about that and exploitation of labor, and this being the labor that I know. And so anyway, so I came up with this installation and performance called 100 Years Without Progress, which relates to the century that elapsed between the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire and the Rana Plaza collapse. And so here we go. This is in this building. This is in an old industrial building where I used to have my studio in Baltimore. It's right on the railroad tracks in Oliver Street. And of course, it has this wonderful I-beam down the center, which allowed me to rig this piece the way that I wanted it. And so here I have people that are counterweight, and so you're using the gearing of the rope sling to do this, so that a weight can lift like 7.5 times its weight because of the wrapping of the rope around the pulleys. Simple gearing or simple lever technology. Anyway, and so we had either that or machines holding up larger machines. And the idea was once more to remove the notion of agency. So we had all of the participants bound in an adjacent room, and then they would just be brought out and rigged. And so here are my assistants. The young woman over there was, because I was actually in one of the pieces, and so she ran the whole show for me. She's fantastic. Her name's Yassine. She's brilliant. She's now studying at Yale. So anyway, so here we had, and I had different kinds of slings, so that I had these, I had the supine thing, then I had this other one which kind of held you. And then I had these other ones which were almost like an easy chair. So if somebody was getting too much strain in the one device, that could be moved into another, of course, without their help. You know, you would just simply lower them down, put somebody out of one device, put them in another, and so on. And this was to go on for about an hour. The first time we performed it, nobody said anything for about the first 20 or 30 minutes. And so I was encased in this thing, and I could hear nothing at all. And it was really eerie, and just, there was so much tension. So the piece, I think, was successful. Anyway, so here's just some pictures. So here's the rear view you can see of the restraint. The people were also blindfolded. And then, we just have people tending to people, being counterbalanced. And it was almost like my ground crew was more important than the people who were suspended, because that was really the important part. Here they are working on. I really liked the composition because you always had this sort of these ropes, this sort of this A-shaped composition, which is ideal. Those were the slings that were slightly more comfortable. And then that was so I was in that piece. So that was me for the entire performance. And also I made sure that I was like the first out and the last in as well. So once more trying to dispel or trying to deal with the criticism of being the sadistic puppet master. So there we go. Oh, more. Okay. And then I was asked, so I was included in a show at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and of course I was thrilled to be in it, but and they liked this 100 Years Without Progress, but they certainly weren't going to put up with people hanging in their hallowed halls. And so, and also the ceiling of this gallery wouldn't support the weight either. And it was one of the things. And so I decided just to use the machines and to have these small domestic sewing machines be the things that held up the industrial machines. And some of them once more are quite large. And so, so here we have it. And what's kind of fun is the machine on the right over there was my mother's machine, my late mother, who died a long time ago. And so after my dad's death, I went to South Africa and I collected that machine, and I still have it. And it's a really wonderful, and you know, she patched my clothing with it. So there's a whole lot of sentiment attached to that as well. And here we go. And I've also, so people are now, if they have a machine in their basement or something, like, they call me up and ask me if I want it. And I'm starting with this project of maybe drawing the machines and then naming it after the person who used it. And so that there's something about that, because everybody has one in their basement. Their grandmother used it or something like that. And I just think it's a wonderful sort of tribute to this idea of labor. And so there we go. And then, yeah. So you could actually stand, so you weren't allowed to stand under these machines. Once more, there were stanchions the museum would not allow you into the exhibition because they were so worried, and rightly so, that something might drop on your head, and then they would be on the hook for that. So once more, getting back to spoons, and my love affair with spoons. And so on the one, and these are very, very large, this is maybe 6 foot by 4 foot drawings. But once more of the classic or the iconic stamped enamel spoon, and then the sort of the decorative spoon, and sort of thinking about class and striving and feeding oneself and being fed, and hospitality, and also about the idea of food crops and non-food crops, and the fact that we've turned nutrition into a financial instrument, so that the stock market trades on the future prices of things without regard for their flavor, their nutrition, their goodness to us. They're just, and I think that so their prices can be manipulated according to markets, and it has nothing to do with the people who perhaps need to eat the goddamn food, you know. And I just think that that's crazy. So anyway, so I went down to my sawmill, spoke to Charlie, who rubbed his belly, came up with a price for 6 wonderful pieces, like 8 foot by like 9-10 inch pieces of locally sourced poplar, which he kindly planed for me. And then so then I came up with a plan based on these spoons that are already carved. I had like 60 or so hand carved wooden spoons, and so based on the same sort of plan for them, I enlarged it to about a 6.5 foot, and then glue and clamps being my friend, started to carve the spoon, and so I deal with wood in a particular way. I don't care what it wants. I have at it. And so, but I had to carve the bowl of the spoon out with hand tools. There was no way that I was getting in there with a power tool, because of the fact that the kind of tools that I have would turn around and bite you in the face if you put them into an area like that. And so I carved it all out with a large gouge. Keep it sharp. And then I made the leather rigging for it, and of course was once more in clover using my beloved hooks. And then I had to do all of the splicing of rope and everything like that, which is sort of fun exercise, and you can my great grandfather was actually a whaling captain who sailed out of New Bedford, and so I could channel all of that matey kind of seafaring blood. And so anyway, so I made the rigging. These are some of the hand carved spoons, and then this is the finished poplar spoon that hangs above it with the rigging to adjust. So there we go. And then that was shown once more at the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. So there you go, styling on their lovely polished, precious concrete floors. There we go. And so we're coming to the end of all this. So have patience. And so, and also thanks for your indulgence so far. So this is a bollard in Hout Bay Harbor, and so that's if you're looking at the mountain, if you went over the mountain, so it's on a peninsula, so there's water on both sides, but that's the Atlantic side of the peninsula, and you can do it by bicycle. It's about 14 kilometers over, and you would arrive in Hout Bay Harbor, and you have these wonderful cast iron bollards, and these ones are particular, and it's an old British Admiralty design, but I've only ever seen them there, and this is the thing to which they tie boats. And it's a fishing harbor and a recreational sailing harbor. In fact, I sailed out of there for a brief period when I was crewing on a sailboat. So anyway, so there you are. And I took a plaster cast of this when I was in undergrad in Cape Town and reproduced these things in cement. And I'm about to do it again. So there's my my foam version of that. So I had a local photographer or a DC photographer and great artist by the name of Frank Day. He was in Cape Town at the time, posting about how his Airbnb had been ransacked by baboons. Yes, really. And so anyway, so I told him to go over the mountain and check out these bollards and photograph them, measure them. He did a wonderful job, and he gave me enough information to where I could make a direct sort of copy out of foam. And so I intend to make concrete versions of this. And so I'm thinking about some seafaring things right now. So this is a sort of a boat cleat attached to one's head. And then this is attached so another way that you do it, which is transverse rather than longitudinally. So I'm thinking about people in some seated way being rigged together, floating in tubs maybe, and then attached to this bollard in some way, and then maybe manipulating the water levels with the tides. I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. This is my idea so far. Also a spoon attached to the head. Why? Because you can. And I'm thinking about much larger spoons and maybe a gimbal or something like that, and dealing maybe with evacuating soybeans that are coming at you very fast or something like that. So that's another piece I'm sort of playing with right now. And then this is a very small inner tube, like that would be suitable for maybe a wheelbarrow or something like that. And so, of course, it should go on the head in one way or another. Obviously, you couldn't float from it, but it could be a buffer of some kind. And then lastly, and because it's nice and colorful, this is my last image of a flotation device, which is really unstable, but it does float with somebody on it, but it tends to toss you off very quickly. So I have to figure out some way of stabilizing it, maybe with guys or ropes or lines or something like that. I like the idea of the problem of it being unstable. So it's once more a steel frame, and then I put a car inner tube in it, and I overinflated it so it bulges through in a very kind of animal way, I suppose, and then making the top piece of canvas for it and lashing it together. And that, I believe, is all. So, thank you.
Fabulous.
That was fantastic. I have a quick question. I have a bit of a hard stop, but I wanted to make sure I got my question in. I love the way your work intersects sort of art and fashion and sculpture, not only fashion for people, but also for objects themselves. It's sort of like this way that you use fabric and coverings to sort of smooth out the brutality. And also the idea of like a cozy, the things people put on, pots and toilet paper and stuff like that, I think is really charming. I wanted to ask you, the trajectory of your work seems to be fairly consistent. It all kind of makes total sense, the way one medium flows into another, the way the subjects and themes all inform one another. It's all the same planet in a way. I'm wondering how the pandemic, if at all, informs your work now as you move forward, or has it at all? In terms of the subject and the imagery.
I'm not so sure. So the pandemic did a few things. It gave me this sort of time off from a routine until we got back into the routine of remote teaching and everything like that. It also slowed me down and sort of got in the way of exhibiting, which was kind of nice. I had, I didn't have to think about ambition for a while or anything like that. But to me, it was the negative experience was that the pandemic gave people excuses to tell other people what to do. And I'm not sure. I mean, seeing as my work is all about sort of lateral power exchanges or hierarchical power exchanges, but that was other than that, I just sort of kept on working and very soon sort of got the idea that, wait a second, you don't have to wash your groceries down with so here's the ways that it did. Once more, it was about risk and threat, and people saw the risk differently to the threat, where they were still decontaminating surfaces, a year into it, where it no longer needed to be done, but they didn't understand how you could get it and how serious it was. So you had those sort of the intersection of those two things, and then also, to me, probably the ugliest version of all of that was the idea that people felt that they had permission to tell other adults what to do in public spaces, and I found that really distasteful. And so, yeah, that's about it, really. It's more personal thing. Yeah.
Ian, I see you have a question.
Oh, I was going to ask, what was the genesis of your love for spoons?
So the spoon is the only utensil that you really put into your body. If you think about even a fork, you only put it in so far. But the spoon, because it's so non-threatening, you can put it right. The entire bowl goes into your mouth. If you think about like soup or something like that, and it's a utensil that is universal almost. For so for cultures that might eat with sticks or eat with their hands or eat with a piece of bread, there is still a spoon, if just for serving, because it's just a bowl on the end of a stick, But then also, so there was this other thing where there was this sort of charm period for a few days when I was in the army, and we were already deployed, but we were about to start another mission. This is on the Namibian Angolan border, and we had nothing to do all day for 3 days, which was unusual. And we all sat around and carved spoons because of our mess kits had such terrible utensils, and they were heavy. We didn't want to take that with us, right? It was just, so if you just had one small carved spoon, it would do anything you wanted to do. They had a pocket knife, and so that and the thing that would carve it, and so we all carved spoons, and mine looked like an ornate sugar spoon by the time I was done with it. And at the end of that, this long, arduous patrol, at the end of that patrol, somebody stole it from me. So I have this unrequited wish for that spoon, and so that's why I carve them all the time.
That's fabulous. David, I have a question kind of about process, because I saw these amazing sketches of your concept with the performance art early on. And then at the end of your talk, you showed some kind of concept sculptures involving spoons on the head, and why not? And I was kind of curious, how do you flush out an idea? How do you get that concept? And do you start with the concrete purpose for doing something, or does it kind of evolve as you explore the idea? Does that make sense? Am I asking right?
No, I do, and it's kind of like, if you think about meaning is like form and content,
Right.
And I suppose a lot of times, I mean, it starts with the form. You know, it starts with a shape or an object or some sort of action that I see or I dream, and then I start to develop that, and I start to understand what is meant by all of that. You know, so that my love for spoons was around long before I decided to use it as a vehicle to talk about the sort of the monetization of industrial agriculture or the industrialization of agriculture. You know, so if that answers your question, yeah, you know, so it's playing with the form until the meaning reveals itself.
Right. So I guess the follow-up question would be like, you know, when people have, I guess, different connotations for objects that you have a fondness for, and you are reusing, like, you know, for sewing machines, like I am terrified of sewing machines because when I was in middle school, we were teaching sewing and I sewed my finger into fabric, and now I have this visceral response against them, and I hate them.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, when other people have different perspectives on objects, like how do you feel about that, and how do you kind of relate to, you know, other people's feelings towards objects that you have a different response to?
So there's two sort of ways to look at this. I mean, on the one hand, I'm responsible for the meaning that I put out there, right? However, I can't completely control how it is perceived, you know. So I can think about all of the possible ways in which somebody might encounter this form, right, or this content, but I can't control how everybody does. And so to some extent, I would be really interested in you encountering this thing with your fear of sewing machines. I mean, it would be a kind of a fun thing. And so yeah, so I suppose it just adds to it. But I do take I take very seriously the business of putting this imagery or this content out there, and what might be sensibly made of it, you know, so that if somebody says, well, it's about this, you know, so I can't say, well, the work doesn't involve some notion of bondage, because that'd be silly for me to do that, you know. So that I feel really responsible for that. But on the other hand, I can't, you know, I can't completely, I cannot aim off for every association that somebody might have with something. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mariana.
Hi, thank you so much, David. This was unbelievable, and I can't imagine. I have to make a list of all the things you provoked my thinking about. Bless you. I want to know about your stitching, and it looks impeccable and not the kind of thing that a young man in any society almost would learn. And would you tell us a little more about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I wonder whether that was like one of the earliest forms of construction, you know, but then because we needed to adorn and clothe ourselves, but outside of that, so my first go at art education was at a technical college in Cape Town. It was just called Cape Tech, obviously not an imaginative name, and that was during the, like, I think I started in about 83, and so it was during the sort of the kind of the male modernist epoch, you know, where everything was reductive, it was big, and it asserted itself, you know, and I thought it was bloodless. Like I could find no way into it. I couldn't get excited about it, and the subversive part of all of that were these female artists, particularly fiber artists, like I was thinking particularly of like Magdalena Abacanovich and the likes, and all these, like all this off-loom weaving and everything like that. And I was fascinated by that. And I didn't have the patience for weaving, but I started putting fabrics together, and really there was this place, a lot, like when I walked home from the train station, if I was using the train that day, there was this place that sold fabric by the kilogram. And so I would just buy kilograms of this fabric, or just use this and that, and I would start stitching together and making strange looking pants and clothing and everything like that. And I suppose that's really how it, you know, and then, you know, if you do something for long enough, you get good at it, you know. But yeah, and I like the idea that there is no there is no male description for what I do. I'm a seamstress, you know, and I sort of like that, you know, that yeah, this is the labor. So then that's why I sort of look at it as the labor of women, and it's the labor of the world, I suppose, you know, and so yeah. Oh.
David, I have one more final question, and I know we're kind of running a little over that. I hope that's okay with everyone, but I was struck by the comment you made earlier about the idea of a puppet master, and kind of thinking about how your relationship to the actors or friends who are, or collaborators, I'd say, who are working with you in a lot of the performances. And it struck me that you were so concerned about the comfort of all the people who are being harnessed together. And I think back to, like, you know, your relationship with Harry Houdini, and I keep feeling in my head that, you know, was he truly comfortable being strapped in a straitjacket? That as an object that feels very discomforting. And I'm curious, like, what as the puppet master, we'll call you, like, your thoughts about that act of being in control. Like, do you ever tinker with the idea, or maybe kind of lean into the idea of maybe being a little out of comfort, because it does feel like a situation where I don't imagine those people would be comfortable. But I don't know if this is that make I don't not following my questions very well today.
So, you know,
like devil's advocate, like,
yeah, sure.
would they be comfortable in the straitjacket?
So I have one like a very glib answer for this, and I came to it because of I did my graduate work at the University of Maryland in around 2000, and the bean counters and the lawyers at the university didn't want me to exhibit my work for my final thesis, and because they were uncomfortable with it. But they had to come up with a reason, and they said, well, I'd signed this document, and it's signing on this convention to say that I will not use human subjects in my research, because it's a research university. And I was so tickled, because I thought it was such a desperate thing, you know, because it was like, you dummies, these people aren't the subjects of my research. I'm not particularly interested in their reaction. I'm interested in the reaction of the viewer. So to some extent, you know, I sort of hold to that. But on the other hand, you know, if you want to do things with volunteers, you know, you better be nice to them, or that. And besides, you know, I'm a human, you know, and so you know, I mean, I find people to whom this is an intriguing idea, and who feel like they want to experience that, and if somebody wouldn't want to, then I certainly, you know, would not want. I mean, not in a piece, you know, because yeah, that's really fraught, you know, and so I think the answer is I don't have to worry too much, because I do rehearse these pieces with people. People don't just show up and I throw them in a bag, you know. There's a whole lot that goes into this. So I feel sort of fine with my role as that, and I mean, sometimes, you know, I mean, I think that a lot of people make art because they want to control the surroundings, right? It's another way of trying to be God, you know. So this is really just a magnification of that. Then, if and I suppose sometimes it is kind of fun just to stand back and watch everything. But normally, I'm terrified that something might go wrong, and so in fact, I'm much more comfortable being in the piece. And all of this started out with me thinking about making these static performances where I would be the art, you know, so that there was something. So I took time off from being an artist. Like after I finished up with what sufficed for undergraduate work in South Africa, and I came to the States. So I took a number of years, of maybe 5 or 7 years, where I really didn't make anything that, I mean, I was creative. I used craft to do things. I made clothing, shoes, and things like that. But I didn't. And luggage, but the thing was that there was something unsatisfactory about making an object and putting it on a pedestal, and then having other people converse with that object and not having me be part of the conversation. You know, like I felt left out of the life of my own work. And so that being in the piece was a way of being part of staying an active and essential part of the work and not letting it go. So there you go.
I like that. I think it's like, you wouldn't put anyone else through something that you wouldn't do yourself.
Yeah. And that I wouldn't do willingly, that I wouldn't jump at the opportunity to do. So yeah.
Well, David, this has been absolutely fantastic. We were so grateful that you were here to join us, and I know I speak for Melissa, who had to dash. It's such a joy to have you here, and thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for your indulgence. So
Bravo.
always fun to talk about your work.
Well, thank you again, everyone. We have Erwin Timmers, who is an environmental glass artist and another co-director of the Washington Glass School, with us in 2 weeks. So I encourage you to, again, join us and tell friends, because we want to share these amazing DMV artists with everybody, because they are, as you can see today, just so talented, and we need to hear more about them. So thank you again, everyone.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really.
Thank you so much, David.
Okay. Cheers.
Thanks, David.